What does saran wrap and epoxy have to do with today's tumbler? Well, it happens to create a really amazing water look. I was so intrigued by this look that I happened to make 2 of these. As always, I want to make sure to put everything I use today into the description box below so that way you guys can recreate these items if you would like to. If you're new to my channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and let's wake up, prep these tumblers, and slay all day. Let's do this. Starting off with my first tumbler. Now this is a big one. This is a 30-ounce skinny tumbler that I purchased through Mother Tumbler. I went ahead and I prepped and I primed it, and this is called Modern Mint by Rustoleum. I knew that I wanted something very light because the first look I'm going for is more of a swimming pool look. So I wanted that really light blue or greenish colors to go along with the light blue that we're going to be adding over top. So I have 30 milliliters of epoxy. Now remember, I'm using a 30-ounce tumbler, so I use 30 milliliters of epoxy. So pretty much if you're using a 20 ounce, you want to use 20 milliliters of epoxy and so forth. Now into my epoxy, I'm going to add a dye. Now this is a specialized epoxy dye, so it's super concentrated. So a little tiny dab goes a very long ways. It's not like our alcohol inks. If you're using alcohol inks, you're going to want to add a bit more. But with these dyes, the smaller the better when it comes to putting it into your epoxy if you've never worked with it before, because you could accidentally saturate it too much. So a little bit at a time, so that way you can work with it and know what works best for you. Now for me personally, I wanted to add a bit of a shine to my epoxy, so I'm going to add a bit of Teal and Great. This is an additive, a glitter additive that you can add to your epoxy, or you can use it to burnish down flat onto your tumblers to give it this just extra sparkle. So usually I say a little bit goes a long way when it comes to this additive, this sparkle additive, but for this, I added a bit more than I typically do. So the reason for that is because I just wanted it extra sparkly. I wanted it to look like the sun was just really shining down on my pool. So I'm gonna go ahead and stir that up really good, and then we're gonna start applying it to the tumbler. So after I got that stirred up, now I'm going to apply all 30 milliliters of this epoxy down onto my tumbler base. And I want you guys to keep in mind that everything I'm pretty much doing to this tumbler, I'm going to be doing to the other tumbler I made as well. But I am still going to show you guys that too. Okay, so just after this one, we get this one going. All right, I applied all my epoxy. I placed it onto my turner. I'm going to heat it up really good with my torch. If it looks splotchy, it doesn't matter because we're going to be putting cling wrap down over top of it anyways, or saran wrap or whatever. You can go to the Dollar Tree and get some, Walgreens, Walmart, wherever you can go to get it. That's all you need. And all you need is a long enough piece of it to be able to wrap around whatever size tumbler you're doing. I'm going to go ahead and take my saran wrap, and I'm going to get it started up on the handle portion, and I'm going to try to keep it as straight as I possibly can at first, because I am going to come through and kind of scrunch it up here in a second, but you don't want it to get underneath your epoxy because then it will get glued down to your epoxy. If it's able to just stay above it, kind of like how I'm doing here, and there's enough at the ends too to be able to pull off, the saran wrap's going to pull off just fine after everything's all cured. So the second one that I'm going to be showing you guys here in a minute, I did embed the saran wrap down deep into the epoxy, so it was a bit harder to pull off, and there was some pieces that stayed on there. Not a big deal, you know, we can fix that. But as you can see here, I'm just going to go ahead and squish everything. You're just going to squish it around. You want it to have those peaks and valleys in there and give it that ripply effect. And you're also going to notice there's bubbles under the saran wrap as well, which is going to provide us with these really cool bubble looking effects after everything's all cured, because we come through and sand it. So it's just going to leave those wells of where the bubbles were, and it's going to continue to look like bubbles under everything. Pretty neat looking. I really liked how that looked. So I'm pretty much just coming through and just squishing everything together, and I did kind of fuss with it a bit, and there is a gap there, which I am going to come through with another piece of saran wrap to fill in that little bit of gap that I accidentally left around by my handle. But I didn't want to play with the piece of saran wrap at the end there where there wasn't enough where I couldn't wrap it around, because like I said, it could get embedded inside your epoxy and make it harder to pull off in the end. So I was just trying to be careful with that portion. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and turn that the opposite way and lay my extra little piece down, and there we go. We're getting our water look going here. Pretty easy so far, right? So now all that's left to do for this one is let it cure. So now with the handle, I want you guys to notice as well, you'll be able to see it when I do pull the saran wrap off, but it kind of built up around the handle portion with the saran wrap, and I actually really like the way it looked. As long as it's stable, you know, I'm okay with keeping it, and as long as it's not too jaggedy, I was okay with keeping it as well, which I'll explain more here in a minute. All right, so for that second tumbler that I made, this is a 20-ounce skinny, and I wanted this one a bit darker. So I spray painted the base of this vintage teal by Rustoleum. I also have 20 milliliters of epoxy that I'm just kind of divvying it up into two other cups here. So into the one with the most epoxy, I'm going to apply the lighter dye, the lighter blue dye, and into these one of the smaller cups, I'm going to add the darker dye. So again, just a little dab will do it. I'm going to do one dab of the lighter blue, and I'll come through and do the darker blue into that extra container. Now I did add a bit of extra white into my other little container that I divvied off epoxy, but this one really wasn't too much needed. It couldn't really see it. Maybe if I would have added more white to it, it would have been seen a little bit more, but it is what it is. I kept moving forward anyways. And just like my first tumbler, I added a bit of that teal and gray right down into my lighter blue epoxy. I'm going to take that lighter blue epoxy first, and I'm going to go ahead and fill in the center of my tumbler, just the center area, because I'm going to come through with the darker epoxy. And I'm going to put some across the bottom area. I will also put some across the top area. I'll place that onto my turner and hit it up really good with my torch. And I did apply some of that white like I talked about earlier, but like I said, you couldn't really see it, but you know, maybe if I would have added more. And also this wasn't really needed either, because once you squish the stuff down over top of it, it wasn't really needed, but I did it anyways, which it still looked kind of cool like it was. If you wanted to not add the saran wrap to it, it looked neat like this. Then you're come through and lay that saran wrap down right over top of it. But with this one, like I said, I got a little crazy with it. My ends accidentally stuck together, so then I was trying to compensate for it, and I really squished this down quite a bit into this tumbler. But I'm not gonna lie, guys, it was pretty cool. I kind of did panic after it cured, which I'll show you why. But I really like the after effect after everything's all said and done. It really added to it. It really added that 3D effect of almost kind of looking like water splashing onto the cup. I don't know. Anyways, so that's what I did with the second one. As you can see here, as I let it cure, this is, I bunched it up really good. That's all you want to do. If you want it super lumpy with the water look, that's all you got to do. I'm going to go ahead and let that cure. And now we're ready to take off our saran wrap and see what we have. So for this first one here, as long as I was able to find where it left off, after I find that, I'm able to pull it back and I'm able to take off all of the saran wrap from off of this one. So I've never worked with saran wrap before with epoxy. I didn't know that it could peel off, like you could use it like that. So I thought that was pretty neat when I found out that I could use it in this fashion. And it really does provide a pretty cool effect after everything's all said and done. And honestly, you could reuse the saran wrap if you have smaller projects that you kind of want to do this to. You could absolutely do that as well to reuse the saran wrap you just used. So now what we want to do is we want to come through and we want to sand down any major pieces that might be sticking up, because we don't want pieces that could hurt. You know, we want soft pieces. Yes, we do want that 3D effect, but we definitely don't want it to be pokey. So I will come through and I'm going to take my razor knife and I'm going to trim off the excess that we got around the rim. That's inevitable because of just how we were using the saran wrap and whatnot. Then I'm going to go ahead and come through with my sanding block and I'm going to sand down the rim really well. And of course I will come through and sand the entire surface of this, just making sure there are no pieces sticking up that could be too pokey. And then I'm actually going to rinse that off with water and let that dry completely before I move on to the next step. Now, of course, with my second tumbler, the same thing. You're going to watch me kind of struggle with the saran wrap because I stuck it down really, really well. But that's okay. If it's sticking down into the epoxy, it shouldn't cause an issue. At least it didn't for me, okay? It's completely adhered to the tumbler, then you can go ahead and just epoxy over it and everything should be good to go. You don't want any of this loosely under your epoxy because it potentially could form a bubble underneath the saran wrap if it's not completely touching the epoxy, so, or the surface of the tumbler, or, you know, adhered to it. So you just want to be careful with that. So I'm just going to come through and remove everything that I possibly can from this surface. And just like the first one, I will come through and I will give this a good sanding as well and prep it for epoxy. So to smooth out those bumps a little bit, we're going to go ahead and apply another coating of epoxy over top here. This is just regular old epoxy. I'm just going to go ahead and give this a layer of that. But I absolutely loved when I started putting the epoxy over top, that water look just really started poking through. I thought that was pretty amazing. But everything I do to this one, I'm going to be doing to the other one as well. You guys just keep that in mind. So I will put a coat of epoxy on the other one as well. And I forgot to mention I did divvy off a little bit of epoxy into a little cup because I want to add some white to it. I want to give it kind of that look of the sun rays shining through. That's kind of what it reminds me of. Again, you know, with all the glitter and then the white over top, it just really reminded me of that. So I just added a little bit of white acrylic paint right down into a little bit of that epoxy that we just used to go over top of our tumbler. So it's going to be a little bit messy. So I laid down a mat and you see how I'm just having it kind of string off of my stick there. And then I'm just going to drizzle that right over the top and I'm just going to put as much as I want down. This is all just up to you as to how much you want to add. And I just want you guys to always keep in mind that there is no right or wrong when it comes to making art. However you feel your art should look like is exactly how it should be. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and pull out my nifty heat gun here, the old Conair, because we're going to go ahead and get this epoxy moving around. We just want it moving around. You can have it swirl as much as you want or as little as you want, completely up to you. I am going to move this around quite a bit because I really wanted that white to kind of fall down into those crevices that were made by the saran wrap and epoxy. So I am going to move this around quite a bit. Now, after I did that, I decided to come through and add just a little bit more, just here and there. But as you can see, that white's just fallen right down into those peaks and valleys. And I'm really liking how that's looking so far. And of course, I'm going to hit it up one more time with my heat gun, just getting it moved around just a little bit more. And of course, I'm going to go ahead and let that cure, and then we're ready to move on to the next step. It has cured, and I just want you guys to see kind of more up close here on the handle how it really gives that 3D look to it. It's pretty cool. But I'm going to come through one more again. I'm going to come through again with my sanding block, again just smoothing out any more surfaces that need to be smoothed out. Now the quote that I'm using, because it again reminded me of a pool hair, don't care. I got that right off of Creative Fabrica, and it came just like this. I just had to size it to the size tumbler that I'm using, and I cut that out and it was ready to be put down onto my surface. I just used a basic white vinyl for that. Now into my final coats of epoxy, I kind of wanted to add on a bit more to that kind of underwater look. So I have some alcohol inks, which I wanted to show you guys that you could use that as well if you don't happen to have the dyes. When you use the alcohol inks, you're going to need to just keep going until you get the coloration that you want. But just know that this is kind of deceiving because once I put it onto the tumbler, it wasn't enough ink for me. So for the final coat, I did have to come through and add a tad bit more. But if you wanted to use that dye, you could as well. You just really want to make sure, again, like I said, that you use just a tiny little bit as you go because that stuff is a lot more potent than the alcohol inks. But I really like how once you put this tinted epoxy over top, it kind of just gives that illusion of it might be right underneath the water. I thought it was kind of neat. So I'm going to go ahead and do that with this one. And for that second tumbler, I did do a decal as well. This was, what does this one say? Make waves. There we go. And I cut that out in a light blue vinyl because, again, I just wanted to try something different. But I did come through using alcohol inks for this one. I did use the dye for this one. So, again, it gave kind of the same illusion, you know, both about the same. Go ahead and let those cure after I apply the final finishing coats of epoxy, and they are ready to go. Whether you take this design and duplicate it as is, or you take it and let it inspire you to create something that is completely your own, I hope that you guys enjoyed this tutorial today. Again, if you're new to my channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I will see you guys next time.